Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, my mind has dramatically changed on a topic that I used to have a pretty firm stance on.
Okay.
Which is, I did not believe that it was good for the world to head in the direction of monarchism or authoritarianism. And I did not think that that was the direction the world was going to head. Now I am reassessing my beliefs around this in the face of the economic reality that demographic collapse will instigate. And I will be arguing in this episode that demographic collapse will both create authoritarian and monarchistic systems, while at the same time making those systems governments with less overall suffering than the systems that insist on staying democracies. And this change, when I say insist on staying democracies, a lot of these places won't have a choice. So let's sort of talk about how this happens before we go into the details.
Yeah.
And this episode will also serve, if you want to introduce people to the pronatalist movement, I'm going to introduce a lot of the basic facts again with their more modern updates to help you understand just how unsustainable and how quickly the existing system is going to start collapsing. But the gist being is that within our lifetimes, in many places around the world, we will be hitting scenarios. So by like 2060, in South Korea, we will have a country where there are 2 elderly people for every worker. And we will start seeing situations like this more and more around the world as demographic collapse continues. And we're going to be going over when various countries hit this.
Did you see the graph on X that Cremu shared? Generated by ChatGPT, by the way. They can just generate beautiful graphs for you that demonstrated how many people were paying for how many retirees over time. And it shows that now, as of maybe today, but maybe even 2023, it's 2.4 workers are paying for each retiree. And that's America.
In the United States or in America?
Yeah. So we're already in a really dangerous place. Like, I don't like this, because also keep in mind, Social Security isn't just for people who are retired, who've paid into the system all their lives. It also plays a role in supporting people who are on disability, people who are severely disabled. Like, this is just not.
Well, I don't think you mean Social Security specifically. Here you're talking about the various social safety nets like Medicare.
Yeah, but still, like, that's all
these
stuff
systems.
We're paying into.
And so what ends up happening is, as more and more people are reliant on the state and on systems like Social Security, this, for our non-American listeners, about 50% of our listeners are non-American. This in America is a system that pays for old people to survive if they don't have savings. And even if they do have savings, like it's a set income you get in the United States, and a lot of countries have this after a certain age. As that demographic becomes the majority of the voting base, they will not make cuts to the systems that are paying out to them. Because they will have the voting power. And eventually that leads to economic collapse. That leads to a complete system collapse, because you cannot pay for 2 elderly people on every 1 young person's salary. What happens if you try to do that, because some countries will be trying to do this before other countries, is young people will just leave your country. And then what do you do? Well, then you start putting in travel restrictions and become authoritarian like anyways, right? But then you have the secondary problem here, which is you're like, okay, well, then maybe they can try to get their fertility rate up. Maybe they'll wake up when this starts to happen. But it's already too late then, because they'll already have, like, even if they start getting their fertility rate above replacement, then they'll already have like 20 years of having every person in the economy support 2 or 3 elderly people in the economy, which is just completely uneconomically viable. And so these countries will become incredibly weak. They also won't be able to field militaries because they don't have a lot of young people. Whereas the countries that become monarchies or authoritarian or fascist in other ways, they will have a single strongman making decisions on behalf of the good of the country and the nation. So they will be able to cut these systems, and maybe even in some cases, and I'm not promoting this, I'm just saying this is what some of them may do, is create, let's say, Logan's Run type things for unproductive citizens.
Runner terminated 0.31. Ready for cleanup.
Showed he had some life in him. In the end.
Wow. Hey, that was a great shot you made.
Well, you kept missing him. I had to do something. It's crazy. He could have renewed on Carousel. Now he's finished forever. Why did they run?
Unproductive folks, your time is past. We'll turn you into fuel fuel efficient and fast. Just get in line to become biodiesel. Oh, stop crying, you annoying weasel. As laid out by Curtis Yarvin, handle the old or we'll all be starving.
And this gets really scary because these countries will be significantly more economically healthy than their neighbors. And they will, as such, not just be economically more healthy, but also militarily more healthy, be able to exercise their will on their neighbors. So if one of their neighbors tries to stay a democracy, with the nature of the democracy being that the majority population gets to do what they want, right? Like gets to steer the direction, and the majority will be elderly, they won't be able to resist the wills of the neighbors that have undergone the fascist conversion. So let's talk about how this conversion happens, because you might be like, well, why would this conversion happen? Well, you have a few things here. First is, and we a bit later we'll be going over using how the Weimar Republic transitioned into the Nazi state as an example of how a country in deep economic shambles can have a youth-led movement transition it to a fascist state, which is typically when this happens. So as the economy begins to break down, there will likely be rebellion. I mean, how many old people are you willing to support? And then you've got the problem, which is the young people who would have an interest in participating in this rebellion are going to be the majority of the military, first of all, but they're also going to be the population that would actually engage in rebellion. Old people actually do not engage in rebellions or civil wars at a very high rate. And so it's basically in the bag that the transition would go to the strongman. There are a few paths around this. Maybe AI could be a path around this. If AI somehow like creates endless prosperity and a genuinely post-scarcity society, then we avoid this. It's a possibility, but it's a very scary possibility to bet on when, as we've argued in the past, what it seems like AI will actually do is concentrate wealth among the ultra elite.
Well, that doesn't mean that the ultra elite will not have some motivation to create daycare for poor people so that they don't make society unstable. Like, it would be much better to put them all in pleasure pods where they're just living in VR heavens if the alternative is for them to be out on the streets causing trouble and maybe damaging infrastructure they've paid for or damaging assets they've paid for.
And that is what we are seeing in our existing society to an extent happen naturally. We saw this with Sam Bankman-Fried's big UBI study that he tried to cover up. You can watch our video on this, but giving people $1,000 a month for 3 years at the end of the process actually led to them having significantly less net worth and earnings at the end of the pipeline. They didn't have more education. They didn't have more kids. They didn't spend more time with. So yes.
I also feel like we kind of moved in that direction with the legalization of cannabis, just to like, let's let you all feel okay with how things are.
But let's get into timelines here, because I think a lot of people, and we're going to go over country by country, may be surprised. So I put in the to AI, to Grok, I was like, okay, when are we going to start seeing these countries' economic or social security systems begin to collapse? So starting with South Korea, because a lot of people see this as like a far off problem.
I literally do not have the constitution to run that search. Like, I should be running that search. I'm so terrified.
South Korea currently has a fertility rate of 0.75. That means for every 100 South Koreans, there's only going to be around 5 grandchildren. That's even if it doesn't continue to collapse. South Korea's working age population, 15 to 64, is already shrinking by 1% annually, projected to drop from 36 million in 2020 to 20 million by 2065. Fewer workers means fewer caregivers and fewer taxpayers. Elder surge, the elderly 65 plus population, is 18% of the population today, expected to hit 40% by 2052. This drives demand for long-term care. So by 2040, the elderly to worker ratio could reach 1:1, up from 1:5 today. And that is basically economically completely unsustainable. It says by the late 2030s, the elderly could exceed 30% of the population with a dependency ratio of 60 to 70%. You're going to have healthcare shortages that would overwhelm the system. So you're looking 2030 in South Korea. You could begin to see things break.
And
Chile,
like,
that's in
6 years.
Yes.
2030.
In Chile, you're looking at a TFR of 0.88 to 1.2. The current median age is 35. So they pointed out that by 2040 to 2045, elderly would exceed 25% 5% of the population, meaning a dependency ratio of 40 to 50%. So collapse risk, early 2040s. Chile's healthcare system begin to break down. And keep in mind that a lot of these Latin American countries have the additional problem that we are siphoning their population. If people are like, why is it so bad to be taking their most productive citizens in these countries? This is why it's so bad, because then these countries are double hit by paying for the young, which are parasitic, and the ultra old that are parasitic to a country. Uruguay, TFR 1.27 to 1.3. It's looking at beginning to break down late 2040s to early 2050s. Costa Rica 1.3 to 1.5. This is again by AI guesses. It's looking at it beginning to break down by 2055 to 2060. Cuba 1.3 to 1.5. And actually with Costa Rica, their native born fertility rate is probably already under 1. So within Cuba, we're looking at 2035 to 2040. Colombia, which has a TFR of only 1.21 to 1.7, it's probably going to begin to break down 2050 to 2055. Argentina, 1.25 to 1.5. It's going to begin to break down in 2045 to 2050. And here I'd remind you that the UN every year has been lying about these countries' projected fertility rates. I'm putting a graph on screen here, which shows the UN projecting these fertility rates. And those are the lines you see that don't look bad. And then the red line is their actual fertility rates. The global powers that be have a motivation to hide this from you because they are the powers that be. And if the existing social order isn't working, if we need to make significant changes to our economic and political systems, the people with the most vested interest to prevent that are the people who are benefiting from the system right now. So
well, in other words, there's absolutely zero incentive, especially for an elected official, to look at anything but the short term. We'll get them immediately elected.
Not just elected officials. We're talking about the journalist class here. We're talking about Wall Street here. We're talking about investors. We're talking about like basically anyone that isn't just like purely altruistically motivated is going to have a strong reason to not mention this and hide this. Or if they really like the existing world order, which is based around this progressive urban monoculture, they're not going to want to admit that this existing world order is not sustainable. Now, okay, you can be like, well, those are Latin American countries. Maybe don't care about Latin America. Let's look at Italy. You're dealing with a TFR of 1.2 to 1.3 now. So Italy, we're looking at a collapse date of 2045 to 2050 at their current TFR with existing projections. Spain, their current TFR is 1.2 to 1.3. We're looking at a collapse time from 2050 to 2055. And note here, I'm not necessarily talking about a government collapse here. I'm talking about a collapse of their social service system. That could look like a lot of things, but we're talking about some form of crisis where either they basically make a choice to cut off tons of people, those people are just being cared for by AI or something. Germany, which is currently at 1.4 to 1.5, we're looking at a collapse timeline of 2060 to 2070. With Japan, so if we go East Asia, we've got Japan, which is 1.2 to 1.3. Keep in mind how low these numbers are. They're basically halving every generation. They're looking at 2040 to 2045. Taiwan, 0.9 to 1. They're looking at 2050 to 2055. And China, 1.1 to 1.2. They're looking at 2045 to 2050. Although I personally think China is faster because I think they're lying about a lot of their
When I think they don't even know. They don't know how bad it is.
Yeah. So that and you could say, well, China is already authoritarian. Shouldn't they be able to fix this? And the problem is that the authoritarian faction that controls China right now is aligned with the elderly kleptocrats, I guess that's what I'd call them, the kleptocratic class, which is this older CCP class, which is just living off of the few young people. And it's why young people like aren't having kids anymore. What you need for this to work is something like a Trump monarchy, where you have a lot of young people who are traditionalists and very excited about that culture, very excited about who the monarch is or who the ruling family is, or even better, like a JD Vance monarchy, or even better within the US, an Elon monarchy. A lot of young people would be very excited about that. You cannot have some stodgy old figure like Xi Jinping who represents everything that has created this situation.
Yeah.
So in areas that are already fascist, either they're going to crack down a lot and somehow save their country by basically forcing them into a form of, I guess you could call it almost slavery to the fascists, i.e. forcing their forcible impregnation, etc., is what we'll see if they're going to fix their situation. Because, I mean, the people in China aren't going to choose to have kids just to support this class. In the United States, when people are like, oh, having more kids just gives you more workers. I mean, that's factually not true. Like Elon Musk is going to have AI working for him. He's going to be fine no matter what.
He also doesn't even really want workers. Like, of the people he hires, it is only the most exceptional few people, he's never going to have a shortage, but he also wouldn't hire normal people anyway. He doesn't need more humans.
Yeah, so Elon Musk is not a situation here, but who does suffer is Xi Jinping. So when Elon Musk goes out there, or when we go out there, we don't really personally benefit from you having lots of kids. Like this is not so we have people to work for us. Xi Jinping and the CCP this is literally the slave owner telling the slaves to have more kids so that they can keep their existing system running, so that they can sell them. It is a different motivation, and it has a very different ring to it. Especially when China's situation could be said to be in large part created by Xi Jinping's slow to act policies.
He's completely culpable. Come on.
Yes. And so I think the governments that do this and do this successfully are going to be the ones that are able to say, we're new, we're like you, we were always promoting you, which is going to mean the pro-natalist movement is going to have a natural place in these regimes as they begin to form. Or what you're going to see happen is people move to charter cities, which are sort of like independent, roped off governments, and just drain countries of their wealth super quickly. And then formerly wealthy countries rotting really quickly. And you may just not see an interest in the powerhouses of the world in engaging with these collapsing economies because there's nothing to be gained. For example, does America, one of my friends in Europe, still friend from the Stanford Business School, he's like, well, why isn't America investing in these relationships with Europe right now? You guys are turning your back. And I'm like, these relationships don't matter. Like, you guys literally will not matter in a few decades, economically speaking.
That is the problem. Like, investing in it is like investing in a friend who's starting to get addicted to meth. And you're like, well, I mean, what's going to be left in the future? What future do we have together? There is no future. You will not exist as I know you very soon. It's just
and we've been helping you for a long time, protecting you for a long time.
Yeah.
Why should we continue to do this when you've got a crippling meth addiction?
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, but this other guy who's addicted to meth might attack me, like pointing at Russia. And it's like, I don't,
he's going down too, friend.
Yeah, that'll be hilarious. But by the way,
this
people
is
are
so
like,
dark.
oh, you're not afraid of nuclear war? And I'm like, no, I'm not particularly afraid of nuclear war with Russia. If you could see their videos on this, there's a lot of reason to believe that none of their nukes work right now. These nukes were made before we were born, and they couldn't even rotate their tires. I am certain they couldn't keep their nukes in good working order. But anyway,
nukes are an entirely different country at this time, having been trafficked without anyone's knowledge. Who knows?
Yes. And somebody's like, oh, you can't mean that. Look, you had a period of 50 years. I'm not talking about and all you needed was one person over that entire 50 years finding a way to profit from dismantling me. I'm pretty sure 50 years is a long effing time. And keep in mind that people often had an active disincentive to report this, even if they found it.
I'd love to see a version of Ocean's 11 about the Russian kleptocracy. That would be fun. You son of a bitch. I'm in.
And even if it was known within the central Russian government that this had already happened, suppose it did happen.
Well, yeah, but they would never admit that because then you lose your. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're even if we assume we're in a timeline where actually Putin has done audits and he has figured out that they don't work, would you know?
98% of the benefit of nukes is this this threat of mutually assured destruction and what you could do. It's almost nicer if you know that you don't have the nukes, because then at least you don't have to pay as much for their maintenance. You can just do a token amount to make people think you're maintaining it, and you can save a lot of money. Honestly, this is one of those things. You know how I am with clutter. I kind of wish that we just didn't have a lot of the stuff that we had, and it's just kind of oh, isn't it nice that we don't have to pay for the storage unit or do this. And maybe he feels that way about his nuclear arsenals.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I'd say. I say it's suspicious that they haven't done any nuclear tests in a long time. If they worked, presumably they would do the tests to show us that they still worked. And you could say, well, we have treaties with them, but the treaties don't stop them from invading their neighbors. They certainly wouldn't stop them from testing nukes just to show the world that they still work. Sorry, I just realized that the audience may be misunderstanding when I say it's been a while since Russia has done a nuclear test. Russia has not done a nuclear test since the year 1990. It's been 35 years since they've done a nuclear test. Most of the people listening to this weren't even born during the last Russian nuclear test. In a post-Soviet era, they haven't had one. And keep in mind that dismantling or selling critical parts of nuclear bombs is quite different from an ethical perspective than the other people who were taking parts of the planes or taking parts of the car or siphoning gas from things, in that it would even be potentially ethical and patriotic to do because nobody really wants a global nuclear war. A person could tell themselves when they're doing it, oh, well, I'm helping save lives, potentially even my own countrymen. So I just find it almost implausible that their nuclear arsenal still works, because if it still worked and if Putin knew it still worked, he would test it to show us it still works.
Well, in this post-collapse world, a really good dark service business would be to without actually going through the entire process of getting nukes, help a country signal that they're getting nukes and like have nuclear tests, the way that North Korea does, and just like charge them for that.
Will work this out. Yes. Now, Israel is a country worth investing in. This is one of the reasons why I'm like, yeah.
Well, yes. They're technophilic. They're maintaining their population 100%.
I want to go into AI. So I put this scenario in AI and I'm like, okay, help me think through how this would play out. Mm-hmm. So eroding democratic legitimacy. As systems become financially unsustainable, younger generations may increasingly view democratic decisions as illegitimate if they perceive them as serving only elderly interests. This legitimacy crisis could weaken democratic norms.
Yeah.
Immigration tensions accelerating polarization. Countries might need massive immigration to sustain their economies, but this could trigger cultural backlash, particularly amongst elderly voters fearing change.
Yeah.
This creates a catch-22 where fixing the demographic problem causes social instability. Military recruitment challenges. Democracies may struggle to maintain military strengths with fewer young people, making them vulnerable to more authoritarian neighbors who can compel service or dedicate greater portions of smaller populations to defense or offense. Digital surveillance advantage. Authoritarian systems might better leverage technology to maintain productivity with fewer workers through greater surveillance and control, creating economic advantages over privacy-concerned democracies. And this is huge. Like the ability to project power is so much larger now for a smaller group. And keep in mind, the revolution may not be the young, it may be the rich. The rich may be the group with lots of power if they have automated drone swarms and stuff like that. We'll release a video soon on how automated drone swarms are in the United States with this replicator initiative is already focusing on like ships that can build their own drones, which function entirely autonomously. And that is the future of warfare. The question is who's going to be wielding that? What countries are going to be wielding that? And any country that doesn't wield that will basically be at complete whim of a country who does. So let's put it this way. If the United States makes this transition before other countries, and we do get like a JD Vance monarchy, let's say in a few election cycles, and he wants Greenland, and Europe does not have autonomous drone swarms, he gets Greenland. Like there's nothing a conventional fighting force can do against an autonomous drone swarm. And the United States is supposed to have its first iteration of this project done next year, 2026. So, keep that in mind. So the AI said, okay, so how does this play out? It says you get an asset price collapse spiral. As elderly populations sell assets to fund retirement with fewer young buyers, assets values could collapse, creating both economic crisis and eliminating the wealth older voters hope to protect. So basically, all of the savings that people think they have, because it's been stored in assets, disappears all at once when they all try to sell it at once. AI governance augmentation. AI systems might increasingly augment democratic processes, subtly shifting powers from voters to technocrats who designed and interpret the systems. You see a lot of automatic voting systems. Military coups in democratic, we'll skip that one. Military coups in democratic systems. Professional military classes might view themselves as guardians of national interests against unsustainable democratic demands. Corporate governance filling voids. Multinational corporations might effectively become governance structures in regions where traditional government systems become unsustainable. Now, if we're looking at the Weimar Republic as a parallel here, Economic crisis is catalyst. The Great Depression devastated Germany's already fragile economy, creating mass unemployment and financial insecurity. Similarly, demographic collapse could trigger a fiscal crisis when pension and healthcare systems become mathematically unstable. Democratic delegitimization. Weimar's democratic institutions were blamed for the economic suffering in a demographic, well, basically, you could see the parallels there. A generational division. There was a generational element to Nazi support. Many younger Germans felt their future had been sacrificed. In our scenario, younger generations might similarly resent democratic decisions perceived as serving elderly interests. Institutional paralysis. The Weimar government became increasingly ineffective through coalitional deadlocks. Similarly, demographically challenged governments, democracies might experience gridlock between parties representing elderly voters, demanding benefit preservation, and representing working age taxpayers.
Wow.
And we're already seeing a shift in young people, particularly young males across the world, towards, I'd say, more comfort with authoritarian governing systems. So if you look at something like South Korea, where you're seeing this split between the women who are largely aligning themselves with the urban monoculture and the existing bureaucracy, and then men who are aligning themselves with trying to find some new system that works, which is largely what in the United States the New Right is about. It's not aligned with small government in a traditional context. It's aligned with cutting out bureaucracy. It really, the New Right, if it's defined by two things, it's one, do not like the urban monoculture imposing its value system on us, or anyone imposing its value system on us. And then secondarily, it's motivated by the idea that we want an economic system that actually functions. We don't care if this economic system is pro-right in a traditional context or pro-left in a traditional context. Like if the New Right could find a way to make socialized healthcare cheaper than the existing system, they would. We've seen this with Trump's American Academy. His solution to the university crisis is to socialize America's university system. That is the most non-right-wing thing. One of J.D. Vance's thing was raising the minimum wage. This is not, and calling this populism, I think, is also untrue, because Doge isn't exactly populist. It's more just trying to build systems that actually work given the data we have. And that might extend to governing systems, where you increasingly see people on the right. We had the aristocratic utensil on recently, who's just a straight up monarchist. We've had Curtis Yarvin on, who's just a straight up monarchist. These people are already invited in, mainstream right-wing circles. And so the idea that the right would say, and Trump's already said, like recently, I'm okay with exploring a third term.
Yeah.
If there's no term limits, and with the demographic shifts that are going to have after 2030, which make it very hard, we'll do an episode on this, for Democrats to win in any sort of fair election at post the year 2030, especially when you look at the existing direction of many voting blocks that they really cared about, this, like the Hispanic voting bloc and stuff like that they were relying on.
Yeah.
There's basically no hope for Democrats. So you might see in the most peaceful context is a short-term peaceful transition, or mostly peaceful transition. Maybe I've often said, if you look at the Roman Republic, we've been around about as long as the Roman Republic was a republic. We might be facing the question of, do we transition into an empire, or do we fall within this generation? And I think that America still has a lot of vitalism to it.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying, I'm just asking, how do you make a democracy? And I'm genuinely, how do you make a democracy continue to work when the majority of the population is on social services?
When the majority of the voters, more importantly, are asking for things that the majority of the bankrollers don't want. That's the problem.
Well, and when the majority of the voters who are asking for what the majority of the bankrollers don't want or will not stand, when the bankrollers are also young, pissed because they're in a state of economic collapse. And I think that what we're increasingly seeing is, if you look at the way our generation views, for example, the boomers, there is a level of hatred for the ways that they have selfishly broken things
Yeah.
that I think we're going to increasingly see within younger generations.
Yeah.
When this collapse is happening, everybody who yelled at Simone and I, all of the journalists, all the, everyone like that who was like, oh, you guys are evil. You guys are, no, you are the guys who created this inevitability, not us. And young people, when they look at the way that you dismissed an obvious mathematical truth heading your direction like a freight train, I do not see them having a lot of sympathy. When you're like, how could you just cut off all Social Security entirely? How could you just let people die? They're going to be like, how could you have put us in this situation?
We warned them.
Yeah, like we warned them. You have a tiger by the tail right now. That tiger looks like it's getting angry. You probably want to let go before it's like furious and foaming at the mouth. And they're like, nah, tigers are always safe. And I think it's because people can't imagine society transforming this much.
Mm-hmm. It's like with the pandemic, people couldn't imagine things getting that crazy. They got that crazy though. It already feels like such a distant bad dream that I really also can wrap my head around us forgetting that the world can change so violently, because
everyone in a position of power just lies to you, where they use social media platforms to ensure that you and people who tell the truth are silenced and lose their jobs and everything like that. Like their ability to attempt to clamp down on power is strong. And we will see some countries where the bad guys clamp down on power, and we will see some countries where, I mean, unfortunately, in this, the good guys are the ones who will want to make political changes. And this is just axiomatic, because you need political change to make the system sustainable, because the current system is just mathematically not sustainable.
Yeah. Oh.
So what are your thoughts? I mean, I still think that I'm not really a monarchist. I'm as they say, techno-feudalist, where I really see this system as descending into techno-feudalism. Again, not because it's the best system, but because it's what's inevitable at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying about monarchies kind of out-competing, but I just also think that it's going to be such a mess that there won't be sufficient incentives to try to pick up what's left behind. Like, people won't, the wealthy people who'd be able to like bankroll or try to influence a takeover and creation of a monarchy would not want that hot mess to deal with. They don't want the people. They don't necessarily need the land in a post-AI world. I think that the people with means will be much more interested in establishing walled gardens in city-states. And they can kind of do it wherever they want, depending on their defensive capabilities, because
autonomous drones are
whose army, whose successful functional government is going to stop them from building their walled city wherever they want to build it.
And keep in mind that demographic collapse is hitting Latin America much harder than like the United States. So like the United States, before it enters a state of collapse, might get us autonomous drone ships and everything like that up and running. That's probably enough to keep the United States safe. But Latin American countries, any rich person could just go in and as this happens, the United States is going to start caring less and less what's happening in other countries. And you're like, oh, the US would use this army to prevent that. Why would it? It has no economic interest in doing that. And it probably economically benefits more from staying on the good side of these few wealthy people. And on top of all that, if any country in the world right now, just like, feeling political winds, has a right-wing party that is open to becoming a monarchy, I'd say the United States falls into that bucket pretty strongly. I would imagine it going in that direction in the same way that it still has a higher fertility rate, that it's still before European countries go in that direction, for example, or before even Latin American countries, which are more likely to go the dictatorship pathway.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, Simone's ancestor was the one who originally turned down, for people who don't know, she's the descendant of George Washington's siblings, and he didn't have any kids himself, so she'd be the closest relative if he had taken the crown, or in the line of closest relatives. So wouldn't that be, if you're not American, you may not know this. He was famously offered to become monarch, and he turned it down. He didn't want to become monarch.
Yeah, early Americans were not completely sold on what they set up. So
does that mean we might have been signaling something, naming our first kid Octavian? Was the blood right to claim the monarchy? I'm of course joking.
His middle
here.
name is George. Just pointing
Yeah.
out.
It's gonna be the technocrats who really have all the power in this.
Yeah, 100%.
And what's gonna happen, which you pointed out, is gonna be a transition of our understanding of economic systems, where it used to be that anything that was fungible and had a fixed value, like we knew how much of it existed, was the core store of value, whether that was like gold or Bitcoin or land. But that was only the case because the number of producers and consumers was growing exponentially. We're gonna be transitioning, and so like taking land mattered in a historic, because land was like a fixed thing.
Mhm.
As we enter like true demographic collapse, what the wealthy tech barons are going to realize really quickly is that the vast majority of humans just don't really matter to their little tech empires. Neither does land, as you pointed out. What they really care about are the productive individuals, i.e. these taxpayers. Like, as taxpayers become a rarer commodity, taxpayers matter more. And if you look at the US tax base, a huge chunk of the taxes come from like the top few percent of taxpayers. And as the wealth gap increases, that's going to increase, which is why the tech barons will have a reason to basically scoop those people up, woo those people to their little micro empires. And this is why in the video game world that we're making right now, it's going to be an AI video game world that I'm really excited. I'm having a lot of fun building. It's sort of populated by something that we call havens, which are these small sort of
Territories.
utopian city states that these tech barons create.
Mhm.
But it's also why, you as a person in the world, like when I look at like what the prenatalist movement is, for me, it's also making sure that my kids are associating with these people's kids, with these communities. When I think about like what it really means to set my kids up to be safe in the future, it's not setting them up for a job. It's setting them up to impress these specific communities, which are going to have a disproportionate amount of power in the future.
Mm.
And if you're like, oh, like a classic person watching this, oh, what if fertility rates plateau, or bottom out? And it's like, it hasn't happened in South Korea. It hasn't happened anywhere in the world where this has been a problem. Not once has a country sustainably reversed its fertility collapse, except maybe the case of Kazakhstan, but that doesn't really count because they were basically undergoing sort of a genocide instigated by the Russians before this, and now it's not a good example. People will say Georgia got its fertility rate up for not even 5 years and then it collapsed again. Like, no one has figured out how to stop this. It hurts the productive populations more than the non-productive populations, or it decreases their populations faster, because the more money you have, the fewer kids you're going to have, unless you're in this ultra wealthy, like over 500K per year class in the United States, which means competent people are going to become a rarer and rarer commodity. And it also, all of the leading indicators say it's going to get worse. Like if you look at rates of religiosity among Gen Alpha, yes, Christianity has begun to tick up. This year was the first year that didn't go down year over year, but you're still dealing with the leading indicators. And among Gen Alpha, there has been a much faster drop than there has been in previous generations. Or not Gen Alpha, it was Gen Z, and I assume it continued in Gen Alpha, but we don't have stats on that yet. And if we see people going back to religion, it's going to look very different. And the way that they go back to it is going to be, like, I think if we're talking about like who's going to be fighting these revolutions, it's going to be Gen Alpha, right? So Gen Z, I think, is going to be the generation that's sort of seen as like the boomers, because I think that they're going to be uniquely low fertility. I think our generation is going to be uniquely low fertility. And I think these two generations are going to be blamed as much or even more than the boomers, because what we're doing is in a way more selfish, given how much the writing is on the wall. I mean, the boomers thought that the Ponzi scheme that civilization had set up could work forever, right? Like, we know it's not going to work. And yet, progressives are attacking people for saying, oh, you should have more kids. They're like, oh, that must mean you're a Nazi. And I'm like, no, you are literally creating fascist inevitabilities by doing this.
Yeah.
And so the best we can do is lick tech baron boots. You guys are the greatest.
Build autonomy, learn how to survive.
Yes. Well, learn how to build skills and cultures that are useful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also the way that like we deploy our family's capital. When people are like, well, what can you invest in a system like this? Invest in solutions. Because if you're out there trying to build the solutions, like our free school system, you should check it out. It's like so much better than it used to be. It's all like
so
AI
cool.
moderated and everything. The Collins Institute, please try the platform. We're about to have a new like ad video that will be airing soon on this that explains the new way the system works. But tech barons, the what was I saying here? the people who have been investing in fixing things, whether that's because they've been culturally invested in this or working on technologies that are working on this, they are going to be the people who I imagine are not targeted by these groups and who are given likely ability to participate in what is inevitably the winning side of this, which is going to be the Gen Alpha side.
Yeah.
And we already see Alpha like acting more responsibly than previous generations. They don't consume alcohol as much. They don't consume, like, water is like the number one like beverage that they're buying. Like they are like, hey, this whole sleeping around thing was a bad idea. Hey, this whole X thing was a bad idea. And the ones who realize this more are also the ones who are having kids more, and also the ones that are economically engaging more. So
yeah.
But this is only within Gen Alpha. This is where I expect to see this transition happen. So I think what we're going to see is a basically societal turnover, and it's going to be very, very, if not violent, it's going to have a lot of suffering as a component to it. And that suffering has been created as an inevitability of people like the left turning the journalist class, the big bureaucrat CEO class, the deep state, turning their eyes to what is an obvious problem.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, oh gosh, well, actually, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I feel hopeful or not. It's just,
have I convinced you? Like, does it make sense to instigate this turnover happening sooner, or to support movements that would have it happen sooner, because it will lead to less bloodshed overall?
I just don't see the revolutions playing out the way that you think. Just like there wasn't a revolution per se in South Africa. It just kind of devolved into the state where it is now. Just
think it all ends up like South Africa. It all collapses.
Well, and a lot of people in South Africa would say it's not collapsing, that, the areas that are nice are really nice. And, aristocratic utensil.
Well, because they have armed
was
guards,
talking about how he was looking at the place where he could live in South Africa and thinking, yeah, I think I'd rather live there than in the UK. So look at it from that perspective. There's a lot of people who already would prefer to live in the walled garden of a post-collapse society, as we would define it, than in the UK right now. Okay.
Well, so let's talk about what this transition would look like. Okay. Suppose we have some governments begin to basically collapse and then have walled gardens where the tech elite can do basically whatever they want, create their own little utopias or just hang on. And in South Africa, you don't have that, because the ultra tech elite was in South Africa, left the country. So you're going to have two things happen. First, you're going to have the very wealthiest leave the countries, especially if their assets aren't tied to something like mining or something like that. And in an AI world, that's what we're going to see, because they're not forced to stay. So ultra elite leaves the country. After the ultra elite leave the country, they then begin to increasingly, as city-states or cities collapse around the world, become sort of like milked or squeezed into fewer and fewer, increasingly disproportionately prosperous countries. But these are going to be the countries that tax them less and let them do largely what they want. So, and that maybe can protect themselves better, like have more like law and order. So what you might see is, or maybe not law and order. Law and order is irrelevant when you have like the infinite money glitch, right? So what we might see is, even if a country like the US begins to collapse, if it's offering the tech elite more freedoms, we'll see them leave countries like Europe and move to the havens within America, increasing the difference between the two countries. If people are like, why are you so certain America will come out of this fine? Well, one, we are the largest country, largest healthy economy with a good fertility rate. We are okay with wealthy people from other countries coming here. We already have systems in place that make that easy. Israel is another option, but like, obviously, if you're not Jewish, there's less of a reason to go there. In the game world, we're creating the post-apocalypse game world. Like, Jews basically live nowhere but Israel anymore, because like, why would you stay anywhere if like Israel's a tech utopia and the rest of the world is fallen?
Yeah.
But America is like a very easy place for them to go. But then you also have the situation of, that we in a post-globalist world are one of the only countries that is stable, both in terms of food and energy production capacity.
Yeah, it's basically our geography, not just our ability to produce our own food and energy, but also our borders, in that we're not completely surrounded. We have plenty of port area. We have a military that, even if very scaled down, is capable of defending where we are. We are okay on our own. Whereas a lot of countries now post-globalization are so anemic in some areas. China is one of these examples that it would take them decades to get to a place where they were self-sufficient. And there are other countries that never, ever could have been self-sufficient.
So to clarify, China imports something like 86% of its energy.
I mean, even like what, the nitrates for its soil. It
even imports nitrates for its soil. It can't even, not only is it importing food, but it's importing nitrates.
Yeah, like to grow its own food, it still needs help. It can't just like, well, we'll try.
If global trade routes became disrupted, China is completely boned. Like they would, not only is their population now, I've seen some estimates out that they might have be as low as not 1 billion people, but 300 million people. We did an episode before, if you want to check it, where we argued that their numbers were probably like 25% to a third higher. This argues that they're 2/3 higher if these new estimates that I've heard from some YouTubers are accurate. And on top of that, they're going to have mass starvation. On top of that, they're shrinking every year. They're just like not relevant long-term as a world power. Japan is much more relevant. I have more faith that Japan can turn this around because Japan for the region actually has a fairly robust fertility rate. And I suspect that they may find a way to fix this. Yeah. Because I'm talking about countries that they have a monarch. If I'm talking about countries that might be just okay with going authoritarian and without much of a fight or pushback from
they can also survive on their own agriculturally and from a defense standpoint, like they're not in the safest position, but they're still at least a sovereign island, which helps. You know, they don't have like immediate land borders with anyone else.
The Japanese culture definitely has an authoritarian streak and works well under those types of systems.
Sure.
So
although, you know, we need to, I want to do more research before we do the episode on high fertility Japanese subcultures, but the subcultures that seem high fertility are actually some of the least authoritarian. So we'll see how that plays out.
Well, they're very like exports of Americana. And
yes and no. Like, no. I mean, no, I think it's not research, so much.
You'll see that you're wrong about this.
I see
direct
aesthetically, but not like
not aesthetically, dispositionally.
Okay, we'll see.
They're very much
the dispositional is just selecting for a similar culture, not
that's not true. So they're very much the truck nut conservatives of Japan.
That's what I was saying this morning. I know you got that from me, but let's do more research on it before we cover it.
That's an American culture. There is no traditional Japanese culture which is anti-authority for the sake of being anti-authority.
Yeah, but as a lot of people commenting on that subculture, this is mild Yankees that we're talking about, were mentioning it's like, oh, you're like this in the UK. Oh, you're like this in Australia.
And all of those cultures are American cultural exports. I looked up every one of them. They're all American cultural exports. They're all American truck nuts conservatives. The redneck conservative has been exported around the world as an aspirational culture. In the case of Japan, it was exported as a greaser-like movement.
We can debate this in that episode.
Okay. I love you to death, Simone. This is where we're heading. And, you know, I think basically what I guess I'm saying here is I think that if we begin to see, historically speaking, if there was a revolution, if there was a transition of power, I would have reflexively been on the pro-democracy side. But now I just don't see how democracy mathematically is going to continue to not cause mass suffering and death.
I think your problem is you've met more people. Plus, you've seen how democracy plays out, which isn't great always.
Well, no, the mistake that a lot of people make who are anti-democracy.
I didn't realize this learn this until very recently, that in like actual or OG ancient Greek democracy, they're like voting up to several times a week. You could be dragged out if you didn't actually show up for a vote.
Yeah, they would have a banner like that had paint on it, and they'd use it. The slaves would use it to round people into the voting area. And if you had paint on your tunic, you'd be fined because it showed that you were slow to get in.
It sounds like such a bureaucratic nightmare. And I mean, on the one hand, it seems unfair because like only Athenian citizen males, I think of a certain status, could vote. But then at the same time, like, I don't even know if they were thrilled to have that honor, considering all the hassle. So, yeah, even original democracy, not the great.
No, but the point is that people are always like, yeah, but you can't trust. And this is always my problem with monarchies: is you can't trust the monarch's going to be good.
Here's the problem. Yeah, but it's a self-correcting system. So monarchs historically, especially when they weren't inherited. Like if we go back to like really early England, it was basically whatever whatever leader was able to maintain military stability and manage resources and then allocate them efficiently and keep things
And
more or
if
less
somebody
stable.
inherits their power base, which is what always ends up happening, if you look at Rome,
I think hereditary monarchies are very problematic.
yes, but if you look at Rome, okay, even if you do, like, even during periods where they're not exactly hereditary, you get some really bad leaders. The problem is that in the era of demographic collapse, even a fairly bad, I'd say bottom 25% monarch is generally going to be better than a democracy, which is favoring an unsustainable economic policy, which is going to lead to mass death. Because at the very least, the monarch is going to want to maintain some degree of long-term stability.
Did Nero want long-term stability?
He wanted enough stability that he could continue to do his parties. Like a lot of these people, and this is the thing about monarchs, is the amount of crazy they can do is often limited to like the amount of crazy that they personally can do.
There are limits to their damage.
It's absolutely horrifying, but it's like, what if you had a society where one guy was crazy and just could like go around murdering people? Given the population of America, like throwing snakes at a crowd for fun and stuff like that, like that's bad, but it's a small amount of damage compared to the amount of damage we're talking about as social services begin to collapse.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is bad if we had a Nero, which generally the you know, I don't think that we would end up getting here. But like, okay, let me put it this way. Take your worst interpretation of Trump, like somebody who has absolutely no positive things to say about him. If he became a dictator, how much harm would he actually cause? Like, he's not the type of guy to do like mass beheadings. If you know, he's not the type of guy to, if you are an active terrorist, he would send you to like a Gitmo or something like that, like actively blowing up Tesla cars to try to like change. That's as far as I can see somebody like him getting. So yeah, I'm just not particularly worried. And then this is why I say like, but it's unlikely to be Trump. Like if America actually goes through this transition, it's likely to be either a Democrat or a conservative leader. And the people like the Democrats wouldn't do this. Oh yes, they would. They already are saying that like the elections are illegitimate for Trump. The deep state already tried to rig an election cycle. Like, of course, they might try to say, hey, we just can't safely allow Republicans to win anymore. And the Republicans are pretty close to saying this about the Democrats. I disagree with Rubio. I don't think it's going to actually be a revolution, but this direction. Anyway. Love you, Simone. This horrifying future.
Thanks for tonight. I love you too, Malcolm. Oh, God. Afraid of forgetting that. So we'll have our bases covered. I just logged on to Instagram and saw that I had like some comments and stuff.
Were they like
why did I look? Like I had posted recently photos of like from our hotel visit and had written something about like, I don't know why our kids love hotels so much because it's, I don't know. It just surprises me because there aren't like toys in the hotel or anything. It's not a kid place. And like the two comments immediately I see, I'm guessing they think anytime they're outside your house is a chance to escape your abuse. Another one comments, they're probably just hoping that someone in a public setting will witness your abuse and call the authorities. I'm like,
why does that stress you out? These people have sad little lives, okay?
Yeah, I guess if I click to their profiles, I can get a picture of just exactly what their lives are like. One is a nurse who takes a lot of pictures of her goats and coffee and she's quite overweight and loves eating very unhealthy foods. So that a thing. The other one,
she lives a life of constant pain.
The other one's just a picture of her cat. Okay, never mind.
An actual
checks
cat
out.
lady.
Checks
An
out.
actual cat lady.
Like a cat lady and an overweight food like binger, apparently. Would seem, I guess, yeah, never mind. Carry on. Just not going to look at comments anymore. It's more like the thing that Octavian actually did at that hotel was go along to everyone at the party, not to report abuse, but to insist that they like and subscribe.
Yes.
Have you subscribed to our channel? It's like this event with really high profile people who are way more like famous and important than we are. Have you subscribed to our channel?
Our
Have
channel.
you subscribed?
Have you subscribed?
He's got, hey, we tell our kids candies for closers, and you know what? Without even knowing what closing is, they are closers.
No, okay. So sometimes at the end of our videos, I'll have videos of like Octavian saying like and subscribe, and you think I bet you think what's happening is before he says that we're telling him to say that.
No. It's like I'm trying to cook dinner, and he's just like standing there being like, "You need to film something for our subscribers. How many subscribers do we have?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Octavian. I haven't checked for like weeks." He's like, "I need to know now." Like,
and I think it's because he also watches YouTube sometimes, so he sees his YouTubers do this, and that's where he's picking it up from. It's not like that we are obsessing about this.
Yeah, it's like if he went to an old-fashioned church and like that was like his main source of content, he'd always be like, and God be with you, and like may Jesus Christ have mercy on your soul, and I was like, yeah, but like in the things that the riffs that he hears again and again are like subscribe, leave a comment below, give this video a thumbs up.
Like first, subscribe to our channel if this is fancy. Hola, hola.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Subscribe first while I'm standing up and now hold it this. This is very fancy. Like and subscribe to the channel if that is really fancy. If you don't like and subscribe to the channel, well, you can still comment the like down below. Tell us what you think about this in the comment below in our video. Bye!
In our towers high, where profits gleam, we tech elites have a cunning scheme. Unproductive folks, your time is past. We'll turn you into fuel, efficient and fast. Just get in line to become biodiesel. Oh, stop crying, you annoying weasel. As laid out by Curtis Yarvin, handle the old or we'll all be starving. Why waste time on those who can't produce when they can fuel our grand abuse? A pipeline from the nursing home to power cities, our wicked dome. Just get in line to become biodiesel. Oh, stop crying, you annoying weasel. As laid out by Curtis Yarvin, handle the old or we'll all be starving. With every byte and every code, our takeover plan will soon explode. A world remade in Silicon's name, where power and greed play their game. Just get in line to become biodiesel. Oh, stop crying, you annoying weasel. As laid out by Curtis Yarvin, handle the old or we'll all be starving. Biodiesel dreams, techno-feudal might, old folks powering our empires bright. Industries humming, world in our control, evil plans unfolding, heartless and bold. So watch us rise in wicked delight as tech elites claim their destined right. A biodiesel future, sinister and grand, with the world in the palm of our iron hand.